Hello everyone. Today I'll be giving a full tutorial on automotive-themed add-ons in Minecraft Bedrock. We will be using Blender and any code editor of your choice to make polymesh drivable entities in-game. As a prefix, my goal for this video is to make add-on creation as accessible as possible. But, as you could probably tell by the length of this video, it's a long and tedious process. For the sake of this video's runtime, I won't be doing a full Blender tutorial. I'll give some tips along the way, but I recommend learning the very basics of Blender if you don't use the program already. No need to go too in-depth, but familiarize yourself with editing modes and tabs, and keybinds if you plan to make multiple add-ons. I ask that, if you're certain you want to spend time learning, have patience and be ready to experience problems that I don't list. I'll do my best to respond to any comments as fast as I can with any issues you may be having. Keep in mind there's many ways to go about getting a finished product. We'll be using Blender, because that's what my personal creation style is, but other programs, such as Blockbench, can also be used in place of Blender. If you prefer it, take some time to learn model creation and join us back at the coding part of the video once you've exported a Json file from your program of choice. Before we begin, I'd like to give some credit to everyone who made this possible. The first automotive add-ons are hard to trace, but they started to gain popularity with Ashmingu. His code is still used as a base today. As for the hyper-realistic styling, that's a result of combined effort of LeanLH, Scorp, and myself, TG. For your personal wellness, I don't recommend doing this in one sitting. After 3 years of add-on creation, the fastest I can convert a 3D model to an add-on is about 2 to 3 hours, and I'll absolutely be taking my time during the tutorial. The good news is, if you've made it this far into the video, you probably have the attention span required to stay focused from start to finish, but regardless, you should remember to take breaks often and pace yourself. Stick it through, you got this. Lastly, before I begin the tutorial, let's do an overview of the process. We first start by either creating or finding a model of a car. We then reduce its model's polygon count to be more efficient in-game. Once the model is ready, we create a texture using the Image Bake tool in Blender. Then, we export a JSON file of the car, a text file containing every point of the model, including information such as locations, normals, and UV position. This is done by using a Blender plugin, which we'll go over in a moment in setting up your save. Finally, we put the texture and JSON together in a resource and behavior pack and install it to the game. And, because this is a popular form of online content creation, I'll also be giving some tips based on my personal experience of add-on creation on publicizing and monetizing. With all that out of the way, we can begin. First, it's time to open up Blender and prepare it for our purposes. There are two major changes we will need to make to help us in creation. One that will automatically be transferred between saves every time you open up Blender, and the other that you'll need to do every time you make a new save file. Starting with the latter, you'll need to be able to view the triangle count of our model. This can be toggled in the top right of your screen in the Viewport Overlays menu. In this menu, toggle Statistics, and you'll be able to see the number of triangles of the model in the top left of your screen. You'll need to do this every time you make a new save. Next, we need to install the MC-Blend plugin. This will allow us to generate and export a JSON file off of Blender Armature with ease. To install this add-on, use the second link in the description and download it from GitHub. Scroll down to the 11.0.1 version and download the zip file. Don't extract the zip file though. Go into Blender, go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and then in the top right drop-down, press Install. Then select the zip file you just downloaded. Once it appears, make sure the checkbox is checked so it's active. The MC-Blend plugin is now part of your Blender program and will be present every time you open it until you uninstall it. For our first real step, we need to get our model game ready. This means getting the right number of polygons and setting up our materials. First, we need to source a model to work with. Sites such as Sketchfab are usually a good place to look, but may contain models that may be higher poly. Ripping models from games is much easier, but much more involved. No matter where you decide to source it, you should note the initial poly count. Anything over 1 million polygons is going to be near impossible to get working. Anything over 300,000 will be difficult, but possible, and anything between 50,000 to 300,000 will probably not be too difficult. This is usually where I shoot for, because looking for models lower than this may be hard to find. If you manage to get anything below 50,000, it should be a breeze. Once you have your file, we can start reducing it. Assure that all cameras and lights are deleted, and make sure it's in individual parts. This means clear of collections or animations. Certain files, like FBXs, can retain these. Simply export as an OBJ and re-import in order to clear them without changing the position of any parts. Make sure all the glass on the model is deleted, as transparent meshes don't work well in Minecraft. Keep in mind it may be useful to combine parts of two models should a low poly version be missing something, or something is not detailed enough to your liking. You can either start by setting materials or reducing polygons. I start with materials here because many of the materials are image texture based, and reducing polygons may influence the look of the texture. Any materials already on the model may screw with the baking process, as all the little tweaks and adjustments can change the baked color. For this reason, it's safest just to remove any material already on the model. Before you do so, make sure any image textures are saved to your computer. To set an object to be a color is easy. Simply create a new material and use the color selector to make it a color of your choice. Never set the color to full black, as this will create the same effect as a void object. Instead, something like 95% darkness will be near indistinguishable while still having the proper lighting. To add an image texture, go into the Shading tab, and drag the image texture into the lower part of your screen. Then connect the two yellow dots, labeled Color and Base Color. The image texture should then be applied. If it looks incorrect, check to make sure the right UV map is selected in the UV Editing tab. Now we need to set a target of polygons to get to. You can see what number your model is at by selecting Statistics in the drop-down menu in the top right if you haven't already. After deselecting your model, the number will appear in the top left. Anything over 100,000 will not load in-game. 80,000 will still be laggy, but it was my target when I first started. As you go lower, the lag reduces, and in general, the better it is. Once you get below 16,384, oddly specific I know, the model becomes RTX compatible, thus that's normally what I aim for now. To start reducing the polygons, go to Edit mode. You could jump to this by pressing Tab. Some useful keybinds are L to select linked areas, C to make specific selections, X-ray mode by pressing Alt-Z, or A to select all. Note, just A, not Control-A. Using these, we can isolate areas to reduce polygons. Things like interiors, rims, and other vertex-dense areas are good places to start. First, it's always a good idea to merge the entire part you're working on by distance, by pressing M and then by distance to combine overlapping polygons. Then, using the previously mentioned selection methods to select areas, and going to Mesh, Cleanup, Decimate Geometry. By adjusting the factor in the bottom left, you can change how much the area is reduced. As you'll see, the higher the factor, the worse the model will look, so try to balance looks between all the parts of the model and evenly reduce everything. These are the basic factors and strategies, but cleanly reducing polygons is a very tricky skill, and it really is something you pick up over time and practice. If this isn't sufficient, I recommend looking up some videos on reducing polygons for more in-depth tips. Baking is the way we make the texture for our add-on. It's the process of taking the colors of a 3D model and mapping it onto a 2D plane. In this step, we'll create any colors you want for your car add-on. A note: before starting, it may be helpful to join objects with the same materials. You could do this by pressing L, Material, and then pressing Ctrl-J. This, however, can mess with objects with image textures, so if you do this and things start looking weird, undo. Now that we have our parts ready, we need to make a UV map for each part. Go into the UV Editing tab, press Tab to exit Edit mode, open the UV menu and add a new UV map to each part. Make sure this is called the same thing across all the parts. Now, assuming you haven't clicked on any of the UV maps, the new one should automatically be selected. Then, hover your mouse over the right side of your screen, press A to select all, then Tab to edit. Then move your mouse over to the left side of your screen, press A, then U, then Smart UV Project. Adjust the island margin, this is the distance between UV parts, and the area weight if needed. Then click OK. If you see any objects with an image texture change color, revert the save and make sure that the new UV maps for that part are selected. If everything looks the same and you see the new UV on your left, you've done it right. This part of the process is where Blender can freeze up to an hour. If it's frozen, just leave it, it'll resolve everything on its own. Don't close the program. Although if you're aiming for 16,000 polygons, it should not take more than a couple seconds. An important note, if you have any image textures you want to be more detailed, now would be the time to manually scale them up in the UV map so they occupy more pixels. Nodes in the UV cannot overlap, so select the part, move it off the map briefly, and then select everything again and find space for it. You can then move it and scale it in the UV to your liking. Now we need to set up the bake itself. First we need to make the image that our texture will bake to. This can be done easily in the UV tab by pressing the New button at the top of the left side. Call the image whatever you like as long as you remember it, and set your desired pixel value. Keeping it square is usually a good idea. I usually go 2048 by 2048. Now we could go to the Shading tab. We need to add our bake image into the materials of each part without connecting it. Go to Add, Texture, Image Texture, then in the drop-down, select the image we just created. Then select it to tell Blender that's where we want our image texture to go on. This is where we have to be careful, as when it's pasted in, it's not selected. Click it one more time. Make sure there's a white outline. Furthermore, if the material has an image it's pulling from, make sure that the image isn't selected when you go to bake, and our bake texture is. Otherwise, it'll bake to the existing image texture. Press Ctrl-C to copy the bake image and paste it into each material of each part, again making sure it's selected. Another note, if you haven't noticed already, Blender is sensitive to where your mouse is on the screen, so make sure you copy the image while your mouse is on the bottom middle of the screen and only paste it when your mouse returns there. Lastly, we need to actually bake the image. We're going to need some very particular settings for this, so follow closely. Go to the Rendering tab, select Cycles instead of Eevee for the render engine, find the Bake drop-down menu and open it, select Diffuse as your bake type. Under Influences, uncheck Direct and Indirect, only leaving color. Under Output, uncheck Clear Image. Change the margin of pixels to your liking. I usually do 2. Too much and the textures may overlap, too little and you may get black lines in the edges of each part. Go back to the Layout tab and press A to select all. Make one last pre-bake save file. This is what we'll revert to if something goes wrong. Then press Bake. If you've done everything correctly, the bake image should appear and color should start getting added. If the image occasionally changes to a texture, you've selected the wrong image in the material. This is where you need to revert and make sure you have the bake image selected. This step may also take some time, anywhere from 30 seconds to an hour. Ignore the progress bar at the bottom, as that's for each individual part and likes to jump. If you see that the progress bar at the bottom is gone, your bake is done. We can check to see if it worked by going to the Texture Paint tab. This will display the selected part as it will look in-game. This can sometimes bug and display the wrong UV map, which is fixed if you select the object in the Layout tab and go back over to the Texture Paint tab. If you're unhappy with the result, revert the save and adjust the UV map or colors, and then bake again. Hey, Editing TG here. I actually didn't expect to be, unhappy with the result, so I need some filler text while I rebake the image and everything. Sorry about this. Back to the scheduled programming now. Once you're happy, save the image and call it what we will be referencing in the code. For this, try to only use letters and don't use uppercase. I usually do the format model color to organize the textures easier. Now we can bake the rest of our colors. Go into whatever you want to change, whether it be main body, interior, or anything else, and either change the color or change the image going into the material. Remember that you can never change the material to full black. Once again, make sure you have the bake image selected. However, now that we only have one bake file, we don't need everything to bake again, only what we changed. So before baking, when you go into the Layout tab to select all, simply select the parts you changed the colors of, and then continue by pressing Bake. Once the image is baked, save the image, repeat until you have all of your desired colors. I also find it useful to save a post-bake file in case you changed anything in the UV map during baking. Time to export our JSON file. You'll need two template files, both of which will be in the description, and I'll name them when we get to them. First thing is to group all of our parts in a certain way. We want to isolate the steering wheel and each wheel from the body. Use Edit mode to separate these objects and join them like I have here using Ctrl-J. Call the main body portion body, and the steering wheel steering_wheel, and the wheels wheel, collectively. Then separate the wheels in this manner, making sure the front left is wheel 1, the front right is wheel 2, and the back 2 are wheel 3_4. Make sure to match the case, and type out the names exactly as I have. Next, we need to make sure our model is the correct size. There is a size ref file I've made in the description. Hold on to this file as you'll need it for every add-on. Import the FBX into Blender, select all but the ref file, then rotate, scale, and move the car so it's exactly in line and centered on all axes. This reference was made with a very general street car in mind, so if you know a car to be longer or stubbier, scale it accordingly. Lastly, delete the file. I forgot to center it along the x-axis here, so I Ctrl-Z to re-add the reference, and then center it on the x-axis too. Once the car is scaled and rotated correctly, press A, and then set the origin to geometry. Now we have our setup, and we need to bind it to what's called an armature. This will allow us to export the JSON with animations. I've left a template armature in the description. I'd also keep this handy. Copy it from its blend file to yours, note it can't be imported, and you should see little dots that roughly align with our parts. Now we just need them to line up exactly. This next segment is one of the more tedious parts and very exact. I'll show you the 10-step process, which you should copy exactly. I'll go slowly though, but as you get used to this, it shouldn't take more than a couple minutes for all the parts to be centered and linked. Here we go. Select an object, Object, Snap, Cursor to Selected. Select the armature, Edit Mode, tab. Select the bone with the same name as the object, Object, Snap, Selection to Cursor. Pose Mode. Make sure that the bone and object with the same name are selected. Ctrl-P to set parent, bone. You can check to see if it's working by moving only the bone. Return to object mode. We will need to repeat this for every object in the model. For organization, I recommend starting with body, then wheel 1, wheel 2, wheel 3_4, and lastly steering_wheel. After the parts have been separated and linked, we just need to change a property within them. In the orange Object menu, scroll down to MC Blend Object Properties. If you don't see it, reinstall the script. By default, this is set to cube, but this will not work as a cube mesh. So for each object, change this value to polymesh. This is important, as if you miss even one object in the entire model, the whole thing won't load in. Another note is that it will bug if there are any squares in the mesh. Usually, Decimating Geometry removes them, but if you have any issues with your model not loading in during coding, go back here, go into Edit mode, press A to select all, then Ctrl-T to triangulate. This will turn every square into a triangle. For safety, I recommend doing this anyway, though I don't do it visually here. Then, repeat the following step. Once this is done, make sure you're in object mode. I often save here in case I need to make any changes to the model, such as the aforementioned error mid-coding. Then select the armature, and we can export our JSON in File, Export, Export Bedrock Model. Name it what you like, don't use any caps or spaces. I usually do Make Model. Congratulations, you're halfway there. All the hard work is done, and now it's just some copy-paste to finish up. I notice some of you coding is a bit intimidating, but the good news I have is that actually I wouldn't consider this coding at all thanks to templates. All you really need to do is swap some variables and names here and there. That being said, you should gradually learn the code as you do this more often, and I do recommend experimenting every now and then as it will expand your horizons a bit and allow you to make some truly unique creations. First, some setup. To code your add-on, you need access to a certain file directory very often. I'll put that on screen now. I would recommend pinning this com.mojang folder, as we will be going back and forth from it a lot. Overall, I recommend always having 2 file windows open, as there will be a lot of transferring. You'll need to change the file types of certain files as well. And to make this easier, rather than using an online file converter, you need to turn on file name extensions in your file settings. On Windows, this is done by going to View, Show, File Name Extensions. Now, when you want to change a file's type, you can simply rename the extension like you would a file's name. Another useful thing to have is an error log in Minecraft. This will be useful for tracking bugs. You can find this under Settings, Creator, Enable Content Log GUI. Now to start the process, download the resource pack and behavior pack templates from the description. It's in the form of a single zip file. Extract it and move both the RP and BP to a separate folder. I personally keep an add-on files folder in my documents, where I keep all of my add-ons in development form. Just a note when using this, I leave any text you need to replace in brackets. I will also leave some example files in certain areas that you may need to replace, such as the example image textures we will be replacing. Feel free to delete any of these files if they don't need modification. The resource pack controls various aspects of the add-on, such as texture, sound, and the model itself. The behavior pack naturally controls the various behavior functions of the add-on. In our case, this is things like seat position, speed, and entity ID. RPs and BPs are both required for an entity-based add-on. An entity is some non-block object, such as mobs, boats, or any such spawnable thing, and has a texture, model, contained in the Json, and usually animations and sounds. We will go one by one, top to bottom, mostly, starting with the resource pack, and I will tell you what each folder or file does, whether or not you need to change it. As you will also be making a lot of your own variable names, remember to never call any file or variable anything but lowercase letters unless directed otherwise. This excludes numbers, spaces, symbols, or any other special characters. Both RPs and BPs share a couple files in common. One, the manifest, controls the text, and the other, the pack icon, is the image displayed on the left as a preview of the add-on. The pack icon is much simpler to change. It's any image, usually square, that is simply left in the respective folders. It doesn't have to be the same between the RP and BP, and otherwise has no requirements. The manifest is responsible for automatically installing the add-on in Bedrock, telling the game its own folder and what type of file it is, RP or BP. While this all sounds very complicated, the file itself is quite simple and there's only 4 things within the file you need to change. The first 2 are the title and the description, quite simple. Within the quotes, type what you want your title and the description of your add-on to be. You can use the section symbol to add color and text formatting. Below this there are 2 UUIDs. These are 2 unique IDs that must be replaced every time you make an add-on. You can generate a UUID by going to an online UUID generator. I've left one in the description. Whenever filling out a UUID, go to the generator, generate one, copy and paste it into the quotes. It cannot be the same between add-ons, and the RP must not share a UUID with the BP and vice versa. Once your manifest and pack icon are set up, we can begin working on the add-on code. The first thing to do is import files we generated from Blender. First, I like to keep my .blend files within the add-on itself, which is why there's a blends folder. If you would like to keep yours separate, feel free to remove this folder as it's entirely optional and not referenced in the code. Otherwise, move your .blend files into this folder. Next, move your exported JSON file into the Models Entity folder. For the add-on I'm making, I am including both the base Jesco and the Jesco Absolute. Because of this, I have a second geometry file that needs to have its own ID. By default, the ID for a generated file will be named geometry.model. To change this, go into the file and change the identifier field to what you would like. For the sake of memorization, I usually use the format geometry make model, similar to the name of the file. Lastly, you can move your texture bakes into textures entity. Now we can actually begin changing files, starting with our item textures. Back up one folder into textures, and then enter the items folder. This is where you place pictures that will show up in the inventory. My preference is making pixel art, but any picture works. Be careful though, anything above the resolution of 64 by 64 pixels will cause excessive lag when holding. One small note is that you can only put one image in and have all the cars in this add-on be set to it. I'll cover how shortly. Once again, be careful of naming. In fact, I recommend making things easier and call each item texture the same as the corresponding generated entity texture. Back one folder again, then open item_texture.json. You can probably make out the repetition here. There's an ID which points to a file path. If you want each color to correspond to its own spawn egg, then you need to copy the section for each color you have, then fill each out. Once again, remember to put commas on all but the last entry. For the file path, you want to replace the last part of it, the file name, with whatever you called your spawn egg for that color. If you're using my format, it should be the same as the texture bakes, model color. For the sake of simplicity, I recommend calling the ID the same thing you called the spawn egg. Repeat this until every color has a spawn egg and you can move on. If you want all the cars to have the same spawn egg, simply make that spawn egg's name into the file path, and name the ID something like make spawn egg or just make. After this, you can delete any other entries in this file and remove the comma. Next is probably the most important part of our code besides the files in the behavior pack. That is the RP entity files. These link all the visual parts of the entity together and signal the behavior pack to act on a given entity. To set one up, open the template and change these values. First, the entity ID, found in the identifier field. This is what is referenced when a file is looking up an entity. These IDs must be made for each color variant of the car, as the textures need a unique entity to wrap to, and so the color is included in the entity ID. This is also why the file is named a color rather than a model, as we need to make one for each color of the car. Remember when making the ID that you cannot include dashes or numbers. For my format, do make model color. Next, the geometry. In the geometry field, type what you named the geometry JSON identifier. If you're following my format, it should be geometry make model. I actually got this wrong by accident, and you'll see this leads to an error which I quickly go correct. After this, in the textures field, you shouldn't need to change the file path, assuming you kept my folder layout. You should just need to change the name of the image that it's referencing right at the end. This is the same name as your texture bake for the corresponding color. For my format, it would be model color. Lastly, the spawn egg under texture spawn egg. Here, type what you called your spawn egg for that color. If you're using my formatting, it should be the same name as the spawn egg picture, model color. If you want all the cars in the add-on to be linked to the same spawn egg, type the name of the identifier you put into the item_texture.json. Once all this information is correct, you need to duplicate this file and adjust each entry to link to the right color car. This should mean, if you're using my formatting, just changing the end of the entity ID, the end of the texture, and the end of the spawn egg. To speed this up, you can use the find and replace function in your code editor to make it a 3-click process. The only variation is if, like me, you have more than one geometry JSON file, in which case you may need to change the geometry field as well. Once you have an entity file for each color, you can move on. Next, open the text folder, then open n_us.lang. This file contains all the spawn egg names. It may look like a bit of jumbled text, and it is, but I'll highlight the important parts. Regardless of if you have your spawn egg separated per color or all to one image, you need to fill out a text file for each color. Each 2-line section is one color. The top line is the text you see when hovering over the spawn egg, and the bottom one is for the text displayed when you enter the car. You'll need to change the entity ID here in the top row and here in the bottom row. To modify the text displayed, type after the equal sign in either row. Like the manifest, title, and description, you can use section symbols to change color and formatting, and any other special character you would like, including capitals. Hi there, Editing TG again. Told you you'd hear back from me. I forgot to mention at this point of the script, clearly I wasn't thinking straight because of the amount of errors I was making, but you need to make a 2-line section for each color of your car, so, each spawn egg and entry text has, well, an entry. Go ahead and copy this 2-line section for each color and then change the IDs in each until each color has the corresponding text. Sorry about that, back to scheduled programming. Lastly are the vehicle sounds, and they have little to change. However, it will take some research on your part. You first want to source a sound file. Find a sound clip from your car of choice, and screen record a 1 to 2 second constant drone. Try to aim for the most isolated sound you can, little wind or background noise, and a segment near the limiter sounds best. I'll play some examples now. Next, convert your file to a .ogg file, as that's what Minecraft recognizes. Once you have your OGG, rename it to whatever you like, and in this case you can use special characters such as numbers and dashes, but then place it into sounds, car. For reasons unknown to me, this name can't exceed 13 characters or else it won't play, so don't make the name too long. From there, back up into the sounds folder and edit the sound_definitions.json file. You'll want to replace the identifier and the file path values with the name of your sound file. For the identifier, put it after the car, and for the path, put it after the slash as you usually would. Now, back up one more to the primary RP folder and edit sounds.json. Here you'll need to link each entity ID to the sound you just placed into the sounds folder. To do this, you'll need to modify each section, replacing the template entity ID with yours. For my format, it's make model color, as a reminder, and then replace the value under the events step sound tree to whatever you entered into the sound_definitions ID, along the lines of car file name. Once you've done one section, copy and paste it until each color is linked, remembering to put commas where needed. With that, you've completed the resource pack. You can exit this folder and enter the BP folder, where you'll need to make the same changes to the pack icon and manifest. Once done, there's only one set of files in the behavior we need to change, found in the Entities folder. This folder contains the behavior for each entity ID, which is similar to the files in the Resource Entity folder, in that one needs to be made for each color. Unlike the Resources files, though, instead of describing the textures and mappings of these entities, these files control how they function. Open one up, and input the same entity ID you did for the resource files into the identifier. As an important note, as far as the game's concerned, this is where the actual entity ID is created. So if you have any issues relating to the entity ID, check the behavior first. At this point, we may need to test the files in game to see how they run. Once you have one file in the entities folder in the BP, that color will appear in-game and can be used to test certain values. To do this, make sure Minecraft is closed, open up a new file window if you haven't already, and pull up the com.mojang folder. In here, you'll see two folders called Development Behavior Packs and Development Resource Packs. These folders have special properties in that any add-on stored within them will run through the code and update any changes made whenever you load into a world with that add-on applied, making it so you could check the add-on, change the code, and simply exit and re-enter a test world to see how the changes affect the product. With that being said, you can move your behavior folder into the Development Behavior Packs folder, and your resource folder into the Development Resource Packs folder. At this point, you can launch the game, create a world, and you should see the RP and BP under Resource Packs and Behavior Packs, respectively. Apply each pack, and then you can apply any cheats or any other settings you want, and then create the world. At this point, if you go to the spawn egg section, and you've done everything correctly, you'll have one color fully displayed and completely functional. Take the spawn egg, spawn the car in, and sit in the car to ensure everything works. And it is at this point that 75% of you are probably in a mild panic because something somewhere went wrong, especially if this is your first watch through. It's alright, that's expected. Code rarely works on the first try, and even I still make errors sometimes, as you have seen at this point. If the egg isn't appearing at all, you probably have an issue in the behavior pack's entity ID. If the text, spawn egg, and textures are broken, check your resource pack and entity ID. If it's only one or two of those, check the respective files and references regarding them, such as those fields in the RP entity file or within the folder of the problem. It's also possible, and at least for me most common, that you may have a spawn egg, but when you try to spawn the car in, it appears invisible. For this issue, or for one that my advice didn't fix, make sure you have your content creator log GUI enabled, and see the common bugs section, timestamped in the chapters of this video's description. If that still hasn't fixed the issue, leave a comment and I'll try to respond as soon as possible. The only visual issue at this point that should be happening is when you sit in the car, your seat position, the place your avatar sits, is in the wrong place. We will fix that shortly. Once you've spawned in your first color and ensure that the item and entity textures, texts, and sound all function as expected, except for the seat, we can begin changing the functions of the car. With that, reopen the behavior in the com.mojang development behavior packs folder, and open the colors entity file. You'll mainly be looking at the components tree, which contains many of the fields relating to the scripts within the game's code. This is where, if you take time to learn the syntax, you can really make something unique. For the sake of the tutorial though, I'll just teach you the basic ones to edit. The first entry we want to look at is the family section. Input the make and model as labeled in the template. This helps using your car for command or command block inspired projects, and is overall a quality of life improvement. Next is the collision box, which is an option to change, but you may not need to based on your car of choice. This is the invisible square box formed at the center of the car that is used to calculate if the cars hit a block or not, and should be adjusted accordingly. Next is one of the more important entries, the movement entry, which controls the car's speed. For the speed value, usually a number between 0 and 1 is good. Note, remember always to delete your decimal with a 0, otherwise the file will fail to read properly and completely brick your add-on. What I personally do is look up the car's top speed in meters per second, then divide by 100. Example, 97.2 meters per second would be a top speed value of 0.972. Lastly, we can change the aforementioned seat positions in the Pull in Entities section. By default, the car only has 2 seats, which can be positioned by changing the 3 coordinates in each section. The first listed seat is the driver's seat, and the second is the passenger's. Adjusting the first coordinate, x, moves you left the more you increase and right the more you decrease. Adjusting the second coordinate, y, moves you up the more you increase and down the more you decrease. Adjusting the third coordinate, z, moves you forward the more you increase and back the more you decrease. Now the usual method is just try some numbers, load the world, check the position, and adjust the numbers. Repeat until you're happy with the seat position. To copy it over to the second seat is easy. You'll notice that, for the second seat, all the values are the same except the x is negative. And that's because by making the value negative, we can mirror the position side to side over the side of the car. So copy and paste all your values and make sure your x is negative and you're all set. You can add more seats if you like by copying each seat section and changing the max rider count and seat count numbers to match the number of seats you have. And now this one color is fully complete. All that's left to do is copy this file and simply change the ID for every color, and all the components should stay the same per add-on. Once you have made an entity file in the behavior for each color, you're ready to finalize the add-on. First, make sure all your colors are functional because, as you can probably guess, there may be issues specific to one color that other colors don't have. Again, it's very likely that you'll run into bugs, try to think logically based on what you have changed, and figure out where specifically the error is coming from. Keep in mind that while I can do my best to teach you where everything is, you don't truly understand each element until you've had to fight with it for a while to get it to work. Once you have checked every color and ensured the item and entity textures, texts, sound, seat position, and speed all function as intended, you're done with the code. The very last part of the process is making the file exportable. To do this is very simple. Drag your RP and BP from your development folders into one location. Highlight both and right-click, then compress them to a zip file. Then, assuming you have Show File Name extensions on, you can simply highlight the .zip and rename it to .mcaddon. With this, if you close Minecraft, and didn't copy and instead moved the RP and BP out of their respective development folders, you can now double-click the .mcaddon file, and it will install the finished add-on to your game. Congrats, you did it! Or more than likely you've skipped here because we're about to cover the bug section. If you're done, feel free to skip this part, but if you've skipped here, then stay tuned. The following are some common bugs that will hopefully fix your current issue. First, the most common cause of bugs is typos. Check whatever file and references are having the issue, and check your spelling and syntax. This is by far the one that happens to me most frequently. If the model is completely gone, no spawn eggs or anything, check your behavior and make sure there's no syntax errors in the entity's JSON. If the model has a shadow but is otherwise invisible, this can be a lot of things, but most commonly it's an error in the RP entity JSON. Check for syntax or typos. If the name is jumbled, check your text file. If the textures for your item or entity are pink and purple, that means that the entity file is fine but can't find a texture. Check for typos and names, and if it's the item texture, check the item texture JSON. The array too large error, seen in the creator GUI, results in your model disappearing. This is because when exporting your JSON, you either forgot to triangulate each mesh or set the type to polymesh and select everything, go to edit mode, press Ctrl T, then go check the settings, make sure that everything is set to polymesh, and re-export the JSON. Remember to re-add the geometry ID when you drag it back into the files. Hi, Editing TG here one last time. This is the end of the bug section. If you're still having any issues, please leave a comment, and I will try to get back to you as soon as I can. Best of luck in your add-on creation, and for one last time, back to the schedule programming. So you have your finished creation. For the amount of work that's required, it's natural to want to share it and monetize it. If you don't want to keep your work private, I'll lend some tips that may help you publicize. The first thing you want to do is choose a file hoster. You can keep your files local, but as you will see, uploading them to a service host is ideal because you can generate a link for your file to be downloaded. There are two options most people go, those being Mega and Mediafire. Both have their strengths and weaknesses, but I've always preferred Mediafire as I believe it's easier on the user downloading your file, but it's a matter of preference. Next, your add-on needs to be listed. The best add-on host I've seen is MCPEDL. It's where I personally started, and it's been with me throughout my journey. Sign in and start the process for listing your add-on. They make their steps pretty clear. At a point, you'll either have to add a file or add a link to download your add-on, and this is when you need to make a choice. If you just add the file, there will be no third-party ads when downloading your creation. However, if you provide a link, you can monetize your content by making a separate ad spot before the download. Like with most things, I won't be doing a full tutorial on this, as it's not part of the scope of this video, but I can recommend certain sites. The two most common are Loot Labs and Linkvertise, and I've used both in my time. From my personal experience and the general consensus of my fans, we agree that Loot Labs is better, but the choice is up to you. Once you choose a site, go through their process and put your generated download link at the end of the ads. You could then paste the given advertising link into the MCPEDL download link. If you end up spending a significant amount of time creating add-ons for the Minecraft community, it's good to discuss some creator pitfalls or possible obstacles you may face as you gain traction. The biggest problem in this community is content thieves. These are people who download your work, host it on their own site, and make money off of it. In the worst cases, they may impersonate you and act on your behalf. Unfortunately, we as creators can't do much about people who steal our work because the work itself is legally shaky at best. so the usual Creative Commons licenses can't be applied to our creations. While we may not be able to combat them directly, there are some things we can do to help credit ourselves and protect against our work being used by content thieves. First, be sure to credit yourself whenever you can within the code. Second, make sure to direct to the site that you host on as your primary source so the users know where to go. Third, usually instead of taking their own photos, they copy your photos too and watermark it with their own logo. The solution to this is simple, just watermark it first. Fourth and finally, spread the word. Make sure all of your fans know who the real you and where you really post are, and that they inform others who may know you in other places. For any impersonators, confront them directly and force them into a corner. They're one of the few things we can actually control because there's only one real you. Striving for perfection is natural in add-on creation. You always want your creation to be the best and feature the most bells and whistles, but understand it can't ever be completely achieved. New discoveries and methods are discovered constantly, and the standards are always changing. Usually keeping up while making slight advances is effort enough in itself, and if you try to load every add-on with everything you could think of, you'll be stuck constantly updating or coding a small set of add-ons rather than expanding. While trying to reach perfection is good, make sure to always keep your goals realistic and allot some time between updates to work on new things. The most important thing a creator can have is empathy. It's easy to see your download count as just a number, but it's vital to remember each is a real person, and they should be treated as such. In order to keep yourself grounded, maintain inspiration, and continue to grow by understanding your fans, it's important to be transparent by using things like Discord or social media, and as open with them as possible, though it may be tough at times. Continued communication and empathy, understanding how they feel, is of utmost importance, from both a business and moral standpoint. An important aspect of this are comments. Negativity is never something you could avoid entirely, even if you have a mainly good fan base. While most comments you receive will be positive and uplifting, remember the negative, or even sometimes toxic ones, are just as important. Though it may be difficult, try to take the negative words in stride, and find the constructive parts of each comment to find ways to improve rather than outright ignoring the person. And remember to never let it get to you. Always remember to be as empathetic and understanding as possible, as it's imperative to resolving the situation peacefully. With that, I've said all that I've had to say. If you would indulge me for a moment, I just want to give a thanks to my community and a bit of background behind this video. Ever since I started add-on creation in early 2020, it's been such an adventure. I've met so many people, gotten to try out so many different things, and bettered myself in ways I couldn't otherwise. I can't say it's been perfectly smooth, but I'll always cherish the memories I made in this community. But with the state of MCPEDL now, as well as the general instability of add-on creation as a financial source, and the rocky state of the community, I've decided it's time for me to move on and start the next chapter of my life. With that being said, I didn't want to leave it in the state that it was, which is why you're watching this video now. I do genuinely hope this helped you, and I hope to come back to the community in a few years and see many new faces leading the market. So thank you all very much for downloading, commenting, and enjoying my creations, and watching all the way through the video. I hope you succeed on your journey as an add-on creator, and I wish you all the best of luck. I've been TG, and I'll see you around. Farewell.